Greetings. We are almost ready to do fun and exciting things, but just one last thing we have to cover the basics of are the views. The Zend manual has a pretty extensive overview of how the views work. Over at the reference guide, you can find it on the Zend view and the quick start, which doesn't really look all that quick considering its length, has pretty good detailed information about how the view works. For today, we are just going to cover the basics. It's a very difficult and extensive topic. We're just going to see how it works in the first place. I will focus on how the layouts are being processed, how to get the data into the view, and how the controller communicates with that view. Then later on, I will eventually come back to switching of context. Like in Zend Framework 1, it used to be the context switcher, where you were able to define whether the result should be in the JSON or HTML or XML or whatever other format. And here it's called response strategy. And of course, we will not forget about view helpers or view plugins. It will be essential to link the JavaScript and CSS files, cache and compress them. As expected, the configurations for Zend View are found in the modules config file, module.config.php. The key in the overall returned array that we're interested in is the view manager key. What we have here are the defaults that the skeleton application comes with. The most interesting ones at the moment are the doc type that just sets the heading for the HTML document that's being output, pretty standard. Whether exceptions should be displayed, what happens when the page is not found, self-explanatory. The confusing part comes down to the layout. This layout is not something that you set yourself as you do for the rest of the files. This is actually a default name that the Zend Framework itself internally uses for the layout name. You can of course rename it as per the manual. If you don't like the layout as the name given to the MVC's layout rendering name, you're welcome to change it. But keep in mind, this is not something that you set yourself, that's internal. And you point to what template file is responsible for the layout. Everything else is flexibly defined. So if I reference any kind of name in the settings up here, then the template map array describes all those settings. You do not have to do everything in the configuration file. You have an option to do quite a lot of this using programmatic code. And in this example, for the dealing with layout snippet, there is a function for set template that is identical to this configuration here, where I am setting a template path, but this time instead of the PHP code. For this exercise, I want to create a home page and the content page based on the ViewModel and the layout engine. I was requested to do this in Bootstrap by a number of viewers, so here we have it. But the way I'm going to set up my code, you can use absolutely any framework that you want. It doesn't matter as long as you abstract it well enough. So this will be the home landing page. And we will have a content page with some random content or placeholders at least. But the most interesting part for now will be keeping the common components in a common layout. So we see here that the top bar menu and this logon box, and to a certain extent the footer, is the same across both pages. So we need to somehow keep those comments so we don't have to copy and paste them into every single view that we have. For starters, let's figure out exactly which parts are common, which ones are static, and which ones are dynamic. The parts that are in interest for this particular case would be the container part. That is our dynamic section. This is what we want to cut out. Things that are above and below can be put into the layout template file. So from the configuration, we know that the default layout is over here. So let's get ourselves in there. View layout, layout PHTML. This is the default page that we see by the skeleton. I don't care about it anymore. I want to delete it so I can start all by myself. Okay. What are my common parts? Well, here is the HTML from which I have created those samples. I want to translate these templates into a dynamic PHP application. And let's push this onto the layout template here. And just to see that we're still in the clear, there is no strange errors that have happened. Or maybe something did happen, who knows, let's find out. I go onto my skeleton application. And okay, at least I have my content. It's not looking good by any means, but at least we have the HTML page there. Now the reason it's not working is because my CSS and JavaScript files haven't been properly pointed to yet. So I want to talk a little bit about the way I organize my front-end files. For libraries, the CSS and the JavaScript especially, I never put them in my project folder. The ones that I create myself, of course I do, but the libraries that I get from other places, the jQuery, the Bootstrap, the X2JS, whatever, I create a special CDN, a content distribution network style subdomain for all my clients. Now I have several projects running on this machine, and I don't want them all to have a separate version of jQuery. So the same way I have split the Zend Framework library, I have also split this XJS and the rest of the JavaScript frameworks. I have my subdomain right here, cdn.local 8080, and here I have a listing of all available libraries to me. The one in question is Bootstrap, and I want to use the version 2.3.0. There we have it. So this is the URL that I want to include. So for the Bootstrap, I want to have that. For jQuery, I want this version here. And I need one for Bootstrap again for its actual JavaScript. I do have two of those. Okay. So now we should have a much more decent looking page. There we go. For now, let's just get rid of the dynamic part. As we have discovered, the dynamic part is in the content div, or the container div, sorry. That's this piece. So everything that's underneath it is of not importance to the layout. So let's stuff that, what I cut out, into the view, then the name of the module again underneath it, then the name of the controller which will be responsible for handling this. I think the home page will belong fairly well inside of the index controller, so there it goes, and index section. kill the default one, replace it with that. And let's just see what we have so far. Well, we have an empty layout. If you remember from Zend Framework 1 days, you can access the views object right from the PHTML template file. And content happens to be the property that has the rendered bit of the index.html file. It's much more complicated than that, but that's the general overview of what's happening. Refresh that. We're still having a mistake. That's because I actually have to output that. There we go. And just for the fun of it, let's look at the source, and it's all still nice and neat. Indentation is lost, but aside from that, it's pretty good. So now we want to do the same thing for the content. Right now we have a 404 page, which just for the record corresponds to not found template error message, because the template is not found. Error 404. Error 404 name is defined under the template map as a HTML file under view error 404 HTML. There we go. Now at the moment I don't really like the way I named my controllers and actions. I have both nouns for the name of the class and the methods, which is quite bad practice. It doesn't really make sense. It's better to have post view, and then later on I can have post edit, post delete, as opposed to the entire blog. So let's just do a quick refactor all the way through. So let's remember we have to do the controller name, the controller file name, and the controller's name under the view, the PHTML file for the action, and in the module changing the name of the controller that handles the post route to post. So that makes much more sense now. Blog post goes to tutorial controller post, and the action is to view. So now we have noun matching to the verb. And same here, post. Okay, let me just double check what I have in my index here. Blog post, no, that should be now post view. So I want to view a particular post. We'll take care of the IDs later. Just doing the hard-coded files for now. Few details. Oops, we have a slight problem. Post view is not found by the route matcher. That's easily fixed over in here. Post view post ID. Okay, this is something I had there earlier. Okay, we do have some discrepancies in how we want this to look. This was the intended result, and this is what we got. That's because this particular page has some custom CSS in it. We will take care of that a little bit later when we do custom CSS per view that will override the overall layout. For now, let's actually see what happened here, because we've done quite a lot of work and there's lots of things happening in the background. At the moment, all we have done so far is split up the page between the dynamic template and the static template. We still haven't figured out how to get the data into the view from the controllers. Note how all the controller actions have this mysterious return new view model. Unlike in Zend Framework 1, you are now in much more control over how the view gets created. So this view model you can control the dynamic configurations of the view as I have shown earlier, as opposed to the configuration file. You can override it right here. But most useful part is the passing of the variables. And it may look really awkward at first, and you may think that this is an overkill and not really good way, but after a while I really got used to it and I do like it. This way I have an explicit control of how the data travels back and forth between a view and a controller. So the way I like to do this is to create a variable that will hold the ViewModel object as part of the action. I should not forget my syntax here. And then I will return that variable. And the reason why I want to do that is because the definition for the ViewModel can get quite lengthy. In my case, I just want to pass in some basic values. Let's say that, let's see, do I have anything interesting here? No, I don't. Well, let's just say that actual content is going to become a variable, right? Because that will probably come from a database. For now, I will hard code it in the controller, but at least the view is now going to be more dynamic. So the key is the name of the variable that the ViewModel will pick up, and its value is the value, actual content. So now the ViewModel object for this particular action has this property set. I can access this property by accessing it as if it was a local objects property right in the template file. And let's see, nothing should change or not. I keep on forgetting the echo. I am echoing the variable. Thank you. There we go. And same drill for the header. I will have a property passed to the ViewModel called, what did they just call it? Title. Called, what is it now? Main content. And there it is. That's how we get the variables across over to the view. So keep in mind that the view is now a complete and proper object that you create an instance of. You configure it with this array as its construct. The variables you pass into it are the array's keys. The values are the array's values. You return this ViewModel object, and all of these keys are accessible as the object's properties in the HTML file magically. Let's see if the debugger has some interesting information about how this actually works. I put a breakpoint into the view template. Here, you actually see what's really happening. The view HTML file, as much as it pretends to be just a dummy HTML, is being included in the scope of the PHP renderer object. The ViewModel is one of its helpers, but this part is the important bit. Let's take a look at what it found. Found some variables, and unfortunately the Xdebug is not up to par yet with the latest PHP's object arrays. It doesn't display them, it just can't. It's a limitation of the debugger, but we can take its word for the fact that these vars are the ones that have been defined by the view object made in the controller. If you don't believe me, if I do that, then it's going to have one less variables in one of its members. This vars, and see, it only has one now. So it does indeed correspond to the variables that's set here. Quite interesting.